Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we mark today, day 495 since the horrendous attack by the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip towards Israel, that included, of course, the kidnappings and murders and all the atrocities committed on that day, October 7th of 2023. Right now, we are at a period of cessation of hostilities. Nonetheless, the deadline announced by President Donald Trump with regard to Saturday is looming near. Jerusalem has also announced that it will back the president's ultimatum for the Islamist Hamas to release the hostages. And with that, I'd like, therefore, to turn to TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about that?
So let's set the stage for what is happening over the last 24 to 48 hours. This update is called Israel at War. For the last several weeks, it's really Israel at ceasefire, even though, of course, fighting goes on, especially in Judea and Samaria, and sometimes Israel strikes targets in Lebanon and in Syria. But there is a very fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas through the mediation of the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, and that has several conditions. The first one, from the Israeli point of view, is the release of 25 hostages who are alive and 8 bodies of those who died in captivity. A dozen of the 25 have been released already, but the last 4 have been male hostages who have been so abused and starved that their appearance shocked the entire world, including President Trump. In return for that, Israel released Palestinian prisoners and partially withdrew inside the Gaza Strip, not from the Gaza Strip. Now, regarding the demand by Hamas, as pertains to the next stage, Hamas wants Israel to declare that the war will come to an end when the next stage will be over. Israel resists that. Into that complex formula comes President Trump's actually 2 statements. One regarding his plan to empty Gaza of its population, and then the most recent one that this is an ultimatum, a deadline for Hamas to release all hostages, not only the last 13 living hostages and the 8 ones for this stage, but the other dozens. The exact number is not known, probably around 45 or so. And the Israeli cabinet has joined President Trump in this demand after Hamas threatened to withhold the next batch of 3 hostages scheduled for this Saturday because Hamas claimed that Israel violated its commitment to allow aid trucks from going into Gaza. The Israeli Ministry of Defense announced that it has monitored smuggling attempts by Hamas to try and infiltrate munitions and other contraband into Gaza along with this aid. Now, all of this can be solved probably if one hears the statements by American and Israeli officials, if Hamas reverts to the original schedule and announce that this Saturday the 3 Israeli prisoners of war or hostages are to be released. But up to now, because Israel is on alert and reserve soldiers have been called to duty again to face Hamas in Gaza, the atmosphere here is very tense.
Indeed. Well, let's turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you to your take on the current state of play. We hear, on the one hand, the governor of northern Sinai, the Egyptian governor that is, stating unequivocally that the flow of aid into the Gaza Strip through the Rafah border crossing has been going unhindered, and he stressed that quite explicitly, while Hamas claims that there are abrupt disruptions, as Mr. Owen mentioned. Hamas is, of course, infuriated by the fact that, on the one hand, its smuggling attempts are not as effective as it hoped for. And the second element is it wants to see heavy machinery enter into the Gaza Strip to start clearing the rubble, something that is not part of the agreed upon outline of the current deal. What can be done, and to what degree is America, following the statements of President Trump, resolved to see the quote unquote all hell break loose in the event that Hamas defies the demands both by President Trump as well as the subsequent announcement by Jerusalem?
Yeah, Jonathan, I could sort of make a long commentary about how America's taking a look at all of this, but the fact remains that right now America is not focused on this at all. I would suspect that outside of Washington, D.C., there are very few, if any, discussions about this going on. It's certainly not coming across in the press, except for intermittent short stories on the national press. But the fact remains is the turmoil back here in the United States is all domestic right now. Primarily the concern that the Democrats have at the overreach, as they see it, of the Department of Government Efficiency and the part of the Republicans trying to get a budget bill through. So among all the domestic noise, there are very, very few instances of wide-scale discussion or widespread discussion of what's happening with regards to the situation we're talking about this morning.
And when it comes to government itself, speaking specifically about President Trump and the various relevant officials, how do they view those matters since they're the ones who ultimately call the shots?
Well, let's be clear. I think if you take a look at who's running the Department of Defense and to a great extent the Department of State, I think probably all of them are doing what is expected to be done of them, which is putting together proper diplomatic and military planning, and probably on their knees every evening, hoping that they don't have to execute those plans.
Indeed. Well, let's turn now to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Reddick Shafir, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot, and a long list of other positions, but we'll leave that for another day. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you specifically about the current state of play from an Israeli perspective. We had here last night Professor Russell Berman, the director of the Middle East Working Group at Hoover Institution, who noted that in the event that a war may break out, it could also include a package deal in which the Iranians would be targeted. Is contingency available in such a scenario in which the planning is far ahead into the uh, possibility of taking out Iran's nuclear infrastructure?
I would say that the possibility of taking out the nuclear infrastructure can only be achieved by the U.S. Air Force. I'll just give an example. The B-2 or B-1 can carry 25,000 pound bunker buster, whereas our heavy fighter, which is the F-15I, can carry something close to 3,500 pounds. So there's a vast difference. And in order for the B-1, B-2s to destroy the nuclear program, they will have to fly for several weeks and bomb the same sites again until they reach the depth at which the centrifuges and the heavy water and et cetera, of the nuclear program is stationed at about 30 sites all over Iran. The Israeli Air Force can certainly hit with pinpoint accuracy several targets, but it doesn't have the ability to retain an ongoing campaign for weeks because of its size. The Israeli Air Force is a tactical air force and not a strategic one. And so the thought that we can take out the program is probably not plausible. But we can certainly inflict a lot of damage on Iran on some of their sites. And in a war like this, it's not just the nuclear program that we can target, but other targets as well, including their oil production and shipping infrastructure. So that will probably be done, if at all, with close communication with the U.S. And I'm not sure that at this time the president is willing or wants to apply military pressure as such. It's certainly not at this time.
Well, Mr. Oren, we do hear, however, that President Trump, on the one hand, he's very keen to negotiate. On the other hand, he has reinvigorated the maximum pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic, something that the Iranians are very infuriated by, to say the least. They have stated that negotiations are not necessarily on the table in the event or they don't believe that President Trump is very honest in his will to negotiate. Is this just rhetoric, or are we expected to see a defiant Iran in the face of rising pressures?
These are only opening gambits in the negotiations. Maybe it's pre-negotiations, but the very talk, even if it's militant, is part of the game. And by the way, regarding your question to General Shafir, the United States, of course, has led the world in systems analysis, going back to the 1960s and the Pentagon under Robert McNamara. And the essence of system analysis is that you find the weakest link in the chain and try to hit that. You don't have to strike the entire chain if you can take out the weakest link. And obviously, planners throughout the world, including in Washington and at IDF headquarters, are focused on that. Now, President Trump has already said that he prefers a piece of paper, but an effective one. Of course, he is discounting the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action because President Obama was behind it. But he prefers that to either bombing Iran on his own or in conjunction with Israel. These are approximately his own words. But remember, regarding the maximum pressure, even during the maximum pressure period from 2018 to 2020, there were waivers to India and China. And right now, Trump wants to start negotiating with Putin regarding the end of the war in Ukraine. And we have seen the goodwill gesture on Putin's part yesterday with the release of Mark Fogel. So Trump is not going to sanction Russia for buying Iranian oil. So there's a lot of talk, but we have to see whether there's real action.
I don't know why would the United States not sanction Russia if it buys Iranian oil. I think they're going to sanction everyone who buys Iranian oil. There might be a couple of waivers, as was the case in the previous maximum pressure campaign, but that is in order to allow them to decouple and find alternative resources. Now, with regard to the JCPOA of 2015, I don't think that President Trump's perspective of that piece of paper had to do with President Obama, who he himself noted at the time that it's better to have a bad deal than no deal at all. In a matter of schools of thought, I assume that President Trump is not keen on a bad deal and rather have the carrot or the stick available on both sides of the equation. But let's turn to General Kimmett. The Iranians still have plenty of proxy power. The most potent one at this point in time happens to be the Houthis in Yemen, or Ansar Allah. Uh, they have now threatened to reinvigorate their hostilities against both Israel as well as freedom of navigation in the Red Sea in light of the deadline, stating that if hostilities resume in Gaza, they will resume their own hostilities. Does that not put them in a direct course of collision with the United States?
It certainly does. And I think at first we would just reinstate the program, the operation that we had in the Red Sea, up to the point where it became apparent that the Houthis were, to use their words, abiding by the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel. I don't think that the United States is necessarily fussed about that. There hasn't been, quite frankly, a ceasefire in the history of the world where there haven't been violations. And I wouldn't be counting, but I would bet that more than 25% of the ceasefires end up in a resumption of hostilities. So clearly, the NAVCENT planners are prepared for this. And I would hope the AFCENT, the the Air Force Central Region, are prepared for this as well.
And in the event of this conflagration or potential conflagration, do you see this also stretched to Hashd-e-Shaabi in Iraq, which has also been on the certain decline, under pressure at least, to say the least?
Well, I wouldn't say the Hashid are necessarily on the decline. I think they're just in waiting to watch how things go. While they're under some pressure from the government to engage in a disarmament campaign, they've shown absolutely no willingness to do so. So I see the Hashid as dangerous and as potent as they ever have been.
Noted. Well, General Shafir, I'd like to ask you particularly, there was a meeting yesterday in Iraq between the RGC, Hashd-e-Shaabi, and other Iranian proxies, the leaders thereof, including former officers of the now fallen Assad regime. Do you see this type of activity trigger Israeli responses against efforts by the Iranians to once again revive their quite weakened axis of proxies, axis of evil, some may say?
I don't think Israel wants another front on its hands, in addition to the ones that are active or semi-active at this time. And frankly, in order to get precise intelligence in that area, you would need to carry out some reconnaissance flights or get the data by other means. So I think as long as nothing comes out of Iraq, like drones or ballistic missiles, Israel will refrain from being active in that area. And at this time, will put most of its focus in Lebanon and Hezbollah. We're about just a few days, less than a week, from the moment of ceasefire, which will end, and Israel will have to withdraw its forces from Lebanon, or at least that's the perceived agreement. And it is not clear whether Israel will do it, whether the Lebanese army is ready to police the area and make sure that Hezbollah are not present there south of the Litani border. So a lot of attention will be given to that area of the world. And obviously, as we can see from the news, Israel is active in Syria itself as well, against the Hezbollah trying to smuggle in weapons through tunnels on the Lebanese-Syrian border. So we have enough on our hands at this time, and will probably not defocus by being active in Iraq.
Mr. Owen, right now we are talking about roughly 6 days before the end of the current stage of the ceasefire, expected IDF withdrawal. Nonetheless, Israel has requested a 10-day extension to the 28th of February, since there are 5 specific locations which the IDF seeks to maintain presence in light of delays by both UNIFIL forces as well as the Lebanese armed forces to deploy in those areas. At the same time, again, we spoke about this yesterday, of course, and we might speak about this more tonight, but nonetheless, there are clashes taking place along the border between Lebanon and Syria. Today, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun announced his intention to fly to Damascus in the near future to meet with the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the self-appointed president of Damascus, who is quite keen on alleviating tensions, specifically. Nonetheless, they also don't want to see Hezbollah maintaining its presence along the borderline.
Well, nothing of substance can be achieved in 6 or 16 days regarding the LAF's capability or the political will in Beirut to deploy it in such a manner that Israel will be satisfied. So the reasonable assumption should be that the IDF is using the time available, and in that regard, 16 days are much better than 6, to prepare the ground for what happens following the withdrawal of most of its forces. Now, if you go back to the early 2000s, right after the withdrawal from South Lebanon, the commanding general of the Galilee division there, at that time Brigadier General Yair Golan, later Major General and Deputy Chief of Staff, came up with a plan which is still operative. It was called Right Positions, and it had to do with taking the high ground on the mountain range that you are referring to, so that Israel controls what happens in Lebanon, rather than whoever takes the high ground in Lebanon controls the Israeli plateau or valley south of the border. And what will probably happen is that in a select few positions, there will be either an Israeli presence or some electronic machinery left, so that Israel will be able to supervise the area and prevent Hezbollah from re-emerging as a threat there.
General Kimmett, briefly, there have been multiple reports about a growing military presence, Egyptian military presence in the Sinai Peninsula, in basically breach of the Israeli-Egyptian peace accords. There were also signals of various threats by the defense minister telling the Egyptian Third Army to prepare itself in the event when they're given an order, particularly in reference to Israel. Is that something that is just pure rhetoric for domestic reasons, or is this concrete measures that need to be taken heed of?
Well, this is the classic conundrum in military planning. You see capabilities, but you can't see intentions. My personal view would be that I think the Egyptian army knows how weak they are compared to the Israeli military, and the last thing they would want to do is conduct a military operation in the Sinai, particularly since I'm not sure where they would really go to. I think this, as you said, could very well be a demonstration, or perhaps a bluff, but that even if they had that intention, candidly, I'm not sure they've got the capabilities.
Indeed. Well, General Shafir, not very much time left. Also, very briefly, how should Israel react to this? Since, of course, Hamas didn't have the capabilities, but did have the intentions, and look where that brought us. Is this something that resonates in the back minds of the planning staff here in Israel?
If we're referring to Egypt, we should make the greatest effort to remain on peaceful terms with the Egyptians. It is true that we're probably, our Air Force at least, is stronger than the Egyptian one, even though they have over 200 F-16s. And a war with Egypt would be very detrimental to Israel's well-being, not just because of the war itself, but because of where we are right now in our war against Hamas and Hezbollah. So if we're talking about the danger from Egypt, this has to be something that is tied to the Americans. We should make sure that there are no diplomatic mistakes that make Egypt turn to other powers, such as China, for instance, for assistance and draw away from the West. Who knows what may happen in Egypt, so we should always worry about aggravating the situation unnecessarily. So we should walk hand in hand with the Egyptians about Gaza and about the area itself and the possible peace with Saudi Arabia. It might be painful for some of the Israelis, but this is a super strategic of super strategic importance to retain the goodwill of the Egyptians and the good relations with them.
I completely agree. With that being said, it's a two-way street. So we need to make sure that they understand that. This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Shafir, General Kimmett, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7israelnews.com.